I'm looking at page 110. Two things to pick up on family relationships. And some of this was to change during the Hellenistic period that followed. But we're now in the Athenian period. Family, the one thing your book emphasizes that women were kept at home. Unless it was a funeral or a solemn occasion, they were not allowed to go out in public. They could sometimes go to the marketplace, but other than that, they were expected to be a good wife, bear children. They would get married as young as 12, 13, or 14. And each of you can just, well, keep in mind, life was a lot shorter than it is now. When the average age at death was about 32 or 35, getting married at 12 or 13 or 14 doesn't seem like such a bad idea because they did not expect to live long. Now, even though, I want to say this, every generation we know of has documented cases of people who lived to be 100. Some of them, even then, lived to be 100, but the average age, we have extended our average age, but it's like we have a limit of 120 years beyond which nobody can go, and we have not extended that limit. That seems to be the upper barrier, and we read in our science fiction books that we'll find some drug someday that will break that limit. We simply don't. All we've done is we've gotten more and more persons to get closer and closer to that limit, but to get beyond that, it's probably going to take some work on a molecular level or genetic level to get beyond that. All right. The other thing I want to say about family life, and folk, again, I'll say I don't really want a discussion on this, but male homosexuality was considered it was a prominent feature in their lives. These men almost always married. They had to marry and to have legitimate children so they could have someone to pass on their estate to, carry on the family name, keep the estate in the family, and whatever. But then they all often had a favorite boy in their lives also. Again, I have mentioned this in connection with Socrates and possibly in connection with Plato and Aristotle also. The Greeks did not see anything wrong with this practice. It was part of their norm. And each of you can decide for yourself what you think about it. But I will mention it. Again, it's in the book. All right. Leaving that then. Going from there to Philip of Macedon, where we left off last time. All right. Philip of Macedon was an outsider. The Greeks were never able to unite themselves, at least not during historic times. Now, maybe back during Homeric times they were, but in historic times they never were. And then, from this there region here, now the Macedonians were part Greek. The Greeks looked on them as being less than Greek, but they were still barbarians. But they worshipped the same gods. And they were neighbors to the Greeks. Well, Philip of Macedon came in, conquered all the Greek city-states, and united all of Greece, something the Greeks had not done. Now, when I say united all the Greek city-states, if you go into detail, he left Sparta out because Sparta refused to let him in. He just said, "Through you on Sparta, they're not worth bothering with." And he and his son Alexander, both did not bother to conquer Sparta. But again, this region here is the region of Macedonia. Now, after Philip had conquered Macedonia, he then turned his attention toward conquering Persia. He consulted an oracle, the oracle at Delphi. So Delphi is somewhere in Greece, and the oracle said, "The bull is ready, the sacrifice is ready to be slaughtered." He interpreted that to mean, let's go conquer Persia. So he proceeded to prepare to conquer Persia, but it turned out the bull that was about to be slaughtered was Philip himself. He was knifed down by one of his own men. The man who knifed him down was caught and executed. So Philip then left the throne to his young son, Alexander. A youngster of only 20 years old, Some Greeks thought we'll take advantage of his youth. And besides, he's got to put down rebellions here and there and elsewhere. But Alexander moved really quickly. They did not know that they were fighting against the best military organizer of all time. Alexander would put down all these rebellions and went to Greece. And to teach the Greeks a lesson, this is a little bit more than is in a book, and it won't be on the test, but he picked on the city of Thebes, the city that had been victorious most recently in their battles, and he hacked all of their men to pieces, completely destroyed the city and obliterated it, and the rest of the Greek city-states lined up. None of them would fight Alexander after that. So Alexander, having gotten all of this area here under his control, he then proceeded to take up where his father left off and head into Persia. He started off, this is not, well, yeah, this is not here, this will do. He started his conquest by crossing here to Hellespont, the narrow strip of land between Europe and Asia Minor. And he met with the Persian king Darius III. Now Darius comes across to most of us as being somewhat weak and cowardly, but at another school I had a young Persian man in my class, and this man said that Darius III in the Persians' mind was the second best military leader in all of history. The only problem was he happened to face the best leader. He simply could not overcome Alexander the Great. Anyway, Alexander proceeded to meet with Darius here. And folks, if you look at a detailed account, which I don't have, but you'll see Darius actually mounted a determined effort to try to stop him. He couldn't. Alexander then proceeded to go farther in, and everywhere he went, everywhere Darius went, he tried to stop him. Now, one battle I do want to pay attention to was at a place called Megiddo. Another name for Megiddo is Armageddon. Now, you're going to hear of Armageddon all your lives, probably, because the writer of the book of Revelation said the last battle of the world would be fought there. Napoleon saw the place one time. I happened to see it one time. Basically, it's shaped somewhat like a bowl. And what it is the two armies, when they meet, they have to meet head on. There is no room for flanking movements. A general over here and a general here can see every bit of what's going on, but there's no room for flanking movements. You meet head to head. Now, Alexander arranged the fight to where he put himself on this side and the Persian king on this side. That way, if the Persian king had to retreat, he'd retreat into Alexander's territory. Now, if Alexander retreated, he'd be retreating toward the Persian Empire. They battle joined. Alexander won it. And the Persian king had to retreat with his army deeper into Alexander's territory. And they were being annihilated. Eventually, some of Darius' own men rose up against him and killed him, greatly against Alexander's wishes. Well, Alexander went on down through here into what is today Israel, and he met the Jews. He told the Jews they must worship Zeus, or that actually he told them that he was God and they must worship him. The Jews refused, but some Jewish rabbis went out and opened up the prophet Daniel that had been written 300 years before. And they said, "Sir, one of our prophets foretold 300 years ago that you were going to come through and defeat the Persian king." That is found in Daniel 7, by the way. Daniel was so impressed with these Jews that he said, "Okay, I'm going to exempt you from having to worship me." And the Jews swore loyalty to him. Alexander then went on to Egypt. He conquered Egypt and took the title of Pharaoh. Then he set off by himself and just a few of his most trusted men, and went to an oracle in Egypt deep in the desert. He asked the oracle a couple of questions, and the oracle replied to him, "Everybody who was involved in the killing of your father is dead." Then the oracle said, "But never mind, Philip II was not your father. Your father is Zeus." Again, I have a documentary which I do not have time to show. It shows that Philip one time peeked in on his wife lying on her bed and saw a great serpent slither up to his wife's bedside. So he went and inquired of the oracle what this would mean, and the oracle said to Philip, the eye that you used to peek through the keyhole, you're going to lose because you saw God, and then you saw God through that eye, and mortal should not look. And honor Zeus with all your might. Philip spent the rest of his life wondering if he really were the father of Alexander, and folk, again, Alexander went the rest of his life believing that Zeus was really his father. You can believe what you want to, but I want to say this, folk. Of all the generals, and there have been persons who have made computer simulations and said, what if the great conquerors were to meet? And they've put Napoleon, Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Cyrus the Great, and they've come to the conclusion that the biggest winner of all of them would be Alexander, the only general we know of who would march to battle in front of his troops. So he'd march by himself in front of his army behind him. He was the first person to engage the enemy, and was only wounded once, and that was in India. Difficult to understand, and unlike some of the others, he never lost a battle. Unfortunately, of all the modern day world conquerors, Napoleon wound up losing, Hitler wound up losing, Mussolini, Tojo, all of them wound up losing. In the last 1,000 or so years, all world conquerors have wound up losing big time. Genghis Khan, actually they figured that Alexander is probably number one and Genghis Khan number two. Genghis Khan we'll talk about next. Again, you can believe what you choose to. Alexander went on from Egypt to conquer the rest of the territory of Persia. Then he went on to Persia and began to conquer India. While in India, he did receive a wound, fairly serious wound. And finally, his troops got together from the generals to the privates and said, we're not going any farther. Alexander wept when he realized he could not get his men to move. So he nevertheless proceeded to go back home, but he never got home. On his way home, he went to Babylon. Some say he drank too much. Some say he mixed drugs with alcohol. But at the age of 32, he died, possibly in a drunken stupor. His body was carried to Alexandria, where he built a city named after himself. And Alexandria has become one of the great cities of the empire. Then his body has disappeared from history. We don't know where it is. This is a bit of trivia. It won't be on the test. But the date of his death is June 10th. Happens to be my birthday, but that's another issue. Just a little bit of historical trivia there. All right. Alexander's empire was divided among his four generals. He did marry once. He married a Persian woman and had a son, but the generals rose up and killed his son. So his son, anyway, the four generals, there were two of them I want you to remember. The Seleucid dynasty, they ruled Syria until the Romans conquered them. And then the Ptolemy dynasty, they ruled Egypt, again until the Romans conquered. Now, the Ptolemies, I'm going to tell you ahead of time, the last Ptolemy ruler was a woman named Cleopatra. Who married Julius Caesar. We'll have more to say about Cleopatra, hopefully today. All right. Of the Ptolemies, these dynasties were to rule for about 300 years. Now, your book also talks about the other dynasty, the Mauryan dynasty that went into India. We've already mentioned Chandragupta Maurya. Don't worry about me, he won't be on the next test. And Chandragupta Maurya was probably one of Alexander's generals, one of Alexander's officers, and one of the man of the Mauryan dynasty who also had a big empire. And what is his name? I regret to say I've forgotten it. anyway, there was the Mauryan dynasty. Regrettably, I can't think of the other man's name. Descended from Chandragupta. Became a Asoka. That's it. Yeah, some of you should remember that, but Asoka. Anyway, that was one of the dynasties, but we've already talked about them. Anyway, the Seleucid dynasty was, like I say, eventually absorbed by the Romans, so were the Ptolemies. All right. Your book goes on to talk about what life was like in the world that came after. Alexander's empire was followed by a period of time called the Hellenistic period. The Hellenes was an old name for the Greeks. Now, one thing that came out of the Hellenistic period, folk, and your book spends 2 whole pages talking about this, pages 118 and 119, and actually to some extent on 120, women became more free and developed more freedom during this period. Now, the Hellenistic age, that's where the Greek culture was spread all over this part of the world. In other words, from Greece eastward toward India. Somehow, women profited by this by becoming more independent. A lot of women learned how to play musical instruments and sing and become artists. Only a few of them, though, were educated, and there was no formal attempt to educate women. But they became more than mere homemakers. Now, in the philosophy, I have already mentioned, I believe, Epicureanism and Stoicism. The Epicureans said, let us eat, drink, and make merry, for tomorrow we die. I'll write this down again. The Stoics, they tend to become the community leaders. They said, no, that life, but we should try to abide by life's rules. Become very, the word Stoic has come to mean a person of no emotional display. Should not shed tears. Pericles was an avid Stoic. Those were 2 of the main philosophies. The Stoics said, have few friends, keep life's rules, be faithful to your wife as much as you can, be active in the community, try to build up your community, try to build up your family, work hard. That was Stoicism. Epicureanism said, what difference does it make? We're all going to die anyway, so let's enjoy life to the fullest while we can. And to this day, nobody seems to know which way of living is the best. All right, now religion. I want to back up a little bit on the subject of religion. The Greek history, their religion started out with the worship of the Olympian deities. Now, the Olympian deities consisted, the head was Zeus. And of course, he had 2 brothers, Hades. Now, the Romans knew these same gods with different names. Zeus was Jupiter, Hades, Pluto, Poseidon, Neptune. Then there was, of course, Apollo, Venus, Hermes or Mercury. Actually, the Venus was Aphrodite. Saturn, Kronos. Again, these are the Greek names, as opposed to the Roman counterparts. The Greeks and Romans actually worship the same gods with different names. Oh yeah, one of the main ones left out, Ares, otherwise known as Mars. These are the names of some of their deities. They actually had a whole bunch more. A lesser god called Pan, who had the legs of a goat, but from the waist up he was a man. Cupid. Oh yeah, after me, you think of Cupid every Valentine's Day. He would go around shooting people with his arrow, and if he shot you with his arrow, you would fall madly in love with the person closest to you. These were some of their gods. Well, as time went on, they began to lose faith in or lose interest in their gods. For one thing, the oracles. Now, I don't know if this is a real good comparison or not, but the last time I heard a weather forecast, the weatherman was saying, well, we might have snow tomorrow morning, unless we don't. Their oracles were that way. And I can understand a weatherman. I mean, he doesn't know whether it's going to snow here in the morning or not. Not really. And it's very difficult to tell. I mean, even with the best of instruments, it's very difficult. But in the case of the oracles, King Croesus wanted to fight the Persians, so he went to the oracle and the oracle said, if you go fight the Persians, you'll destroy a great empire. He went and fought the Persians, and he and his empire, his own empire, was the one that was destroyed. And I've already mentioned how that an oracle seemed to trick Philip of Macedon. But basically, these oracles were giving vague and very, very indefinite answers, and answers that you had to try to interpret yourself, and much too often, the answers were actually against you and you didn't realize it. Like in the case of Philip, where the oracle said, the sacrifice has been made, the sacrificial knife is ready. Well, the sacrificial knife only cut him down. But it appears, folk, now again, you can believe what you want to, but these oracles eventually fell into disuse and into disrepair, and today they're obsolete. It appears at some point that the oracles simply quit talking to the human people who came to them. And as to why that would be, your guess is as good as mine. I have a theory, but this is not a theology class, and believe it or not, there's some things even I'm afraid to say. I simply cannot give what the theory I have. But basically, their oracles, their gods, seemed to quit communicating with them. So as they lost interest in their old gods, new gods stepped forward. Most notably, the old Egyptian. Your book pronounces her name Isis. And I can't emphasize enough, this name keeps recurring all the way down through the ages. And there are rumors that secret organizations have worshipped Isis all the way down through time, and that Isis is still worshipped today. And of course, another group named ISIS is making a lot of news and headlines today by their meteor rocket-like rise to power. And I don't know how far they'll get, folk. I simply don't. This brings us up to the mystery religions. The mystery religions became very prominent. Now, here's what I want to say about the mystery. They have been credited with leading up to Christianity. Mystery. Now, no two mystery religions were alike, but essentially, the mystery cults would say that there was a Savior God who had left the heavens and come to earth. Then he had died a horrible death. And if you could join yourself to this Savior God, you would achieve happiness here and a happy afterlife afterward. Now, this may sound a whole lot like Christianity. But, folk, there are two very important differences, which is why I would not call Christianity a mystery religion. Difference number one is Christianity had no secrets. Supposedly a Christian would tell you what he believed. I mean, except maybe under extreme persecution, under fear of persecution, he might not. But at least he knew what he believed, and what he believed was written in a book and was wide open for all to read. There were no mysteries. Second of all, Christianity, as opposed to mystery religion, Christianity would take in everyone. Now, the mystery religions were a lot like our fraternities or our the Masons. I'll just call it the Masons. They only take the best of people. Now, the mystery cults would brag that we got Mr. So-and-so here, and he's the mayor of the town. But we got Mr. Stuss. And they were all men, by the way. But they only took the absolute best of the men in the town, and each of them would try to outdo the other to try to get certain men. And these men, of course, would meet in secret, and they would not tell anyone outside their own cult what they were up to or what they were doing, but they would meet in secret and go through their rituals in some kind of secret initiation. Well, they had these initiations. Christianity, by the way, had no initiation unless you consider the rite of baptism. Some Christian groups would sprinkle, and some would dip underwater, but immersion. But other than that, there was no initiation. The mystery religion would brag on how rough their initiations were, and yes, some of them were so rough that some men became permanently disabled or died going through them. Again, Christianity, in contrast, said, we'll take in everybody, male and female alike. We'll take in the thief, the mentally feeble, the uneducated, the poor, the downtrodden, the slave, even the master, the prostitute. Yeah, we even take those in. We can believe we can clean them up. The drunk, we will take those. Anybody was allowed to join. In contrast to mystery religions. But otherwise, the mystery religions had a lot in common with the Christian religion that was to come later. Okay, that takes us to the end of this chapter. And now I'm going to move on quickly to chapter 5, where the syllabus calls for me starting today. Folk, after today, I've only got 2 classes between now and the March 4th test. And I got to realize that now I'd better step on it, so if you think I'm in a hurry, I really am. All right, Rome. According to tradition, Rome was founded in 753 BCE, and I'm not going to write that date down. But, all right, now there's a city nearby called Rome. And if you visit Rome, Georgia, you'll find a statue of a she-wolf who are nursing 2 twin boys. According to Roman legend, the twins were born, and the twins' names were Romulus and Remus. Their parents didn't want them, so the parents threw them out, and wolves reared them up. Now, folk, there have been at least 50-some documented cases of wolves bringing up human babies, and doing so successfully. The wolves reared them up, and the boys eventually met humans and figured out finally that they were in fact human. They went to a place in Italy that had 7 hills. Unfortunately, Romulus killed Remus, and the city of Rome was then named after him. Romulus became Rome's founder and first leader. By any chance, have any of you seen the statue I'm talking about in Rome, Georgia? Nobody in the other class had either. I've had a few pupils from some of them have seen it. But, anyway, the last time I was there, it was still there. Probably still is. All right, Romulus. Now, geography plays a big part in history. In the case of the Greeks, the mountain peaks were somewhat like this. In the case of Italy, the mountains were much, much more gentle, which meant that the Italians had an easier time unifying themselves because the mountains did not present a really formidable barrier. They were not as high and did not have as many steep slopes as these more rugged mountains here in Greece. Now, Rome itself is located on the western side of Italy, but it's about halfway down a peninsula, which means it's somewhat ideal to be a capital of the Italian peninsula. Now, Rome is located on the Tiber River. It's known as the City of 7 Hills. It's also known as the Eternal City. I'm not going to write that down, but it's known as the Eternal City. Now, it is 50 miles from the ocean, and there are 2 reasons for that. Number one is it guaranteed that no tidal wave, and apparently tidal waves were a big problem in those days. It guaranteed that no tidal wave would ever reach Rome, and as far as we know, none ever has. It also guaranteed that Rome would not be attacked by pirates. Pirates are afraid to venture very far up a river because they know that if a big navy comes after them. Now, pirates are the type of people who, when they outnumber you, they'll enjoy hacking you to pieces. But when they meet with a trained army who's equal to them, they'll turn and flee. Basically, underneath, they're cowards. So no pirates, as far as we know, or a few pirates would ever venture 50 miles up the Tiber River to bother Rome because it would be too easy for the Romans to shoot at them with flaming arrows or to send an army at the mouth of the river and block them off and block off all retreat. And the pirates just did not want to find themselves cornered. So it kept down pirates. Now, Rome started out ruled by 7 kings, and nobody seemed to question the existence of these kings until 200 years ago, a historian named Gibbon. Gibbon was highly critical, by the way, of all ancient literature, including the Bible. But Gibbon said, I don't believe these 7 kings existed. And nobody could really prove that they have. And in the last 200 years, we've decided that the last 3 of those kings definitely existed, and the last 3 were probably Etruscan. The Romans were attacked and overpowered for a while by the Etruscans. Eventually, the Romans, by the way, were sometimes called Latins. And the language they spoke, is the Latin language, was to become the official religion of the empire. Anyway, the 2 of the last 3 kings are known to have existed and were Etruscans. Then Rome threw off the monarchy and set up a republic. Again, folk, this follows the pattern of a lot of Greek city-states, except Sparta, where they would have a monarchy for a while and then throw the monarchy off and establish something resembling democracy. And in the ancient world, folk, all democracies failed. And we're going to find out this one did also. Anyway, they set up a republic. The republic was to last a couple hundred years, and our own republic is about a little bit more than 200 years. Well, we celebrated 200th birthday in 1976, but then we really did not get our independence until 1781, so that means we should have celebrated 200th birthday in 1981. We're a little bit more than 200 years old. The Roman Republic lasted about 200 years before it gave way to a dictatorship and then an empire. Now, the way the Romans built up their empire, it's been said they never intended to. But they fought a war against a city-state. And then when they defeated that state, they went to them and said, hey, now we're going to build a road from our city to yours. We want you to be our ally. But we want to trade with you. And this road will enable us to easily transport heavy carts back and forth between our place and yours. And we would hope that your sons will marry our daughters, and we hope that you'll allow our sons to marry your daughters. We want you to become one with us. In turn, we'll protect you from the other city-states, and we hope you'll come and protect us. Well, these 2 city-states got together, and they conquered another city and built a road. Roman roads were of really high quality. Your book shows a picture of them on page 127. They're such good quality that even today we can drive modern-day automobiles on the roads. A lot of the roads the Romans built were still in use. But you might can see what eventually happened was it became a saying after a while, all roads lead to Rome. That was because the Romans would build a road straight from their city to another, and after a while, hey, get on a road, and if you find a road, turn toward the direction of Rome, and that road, all roads lead to Rome. That became a saying in old times. That's not as true today, obviously, once in a while. But if you look at the map on page 127, it actually shows that Rome was like the spokes of a wheel. If you know anything about the old-fashioned wagon wheel, the spokes all led out from the center. And all roads, almost all roads at least, did lead to Rome. Now, it was one thing for the Romans to be able to conquer people who spoke the same language they did, who had the same religion they did, and a lot of the same family values. And after a short while, maybe a couple of generations, Rome became the master of all of Italy. Okay, they have Italy now. They were destined, of course, to eventually get the entire Mediterranean. But while they were building up their empire, to the south, more straight south, was another city that was building up their empire also. The city of Carthage. But before we get to Carthage, I want to mention something that happened. There were 2 classes of people, the plebeians. These were the poor, and the rich, the patricians. There were struggles between the plebeians and patricians, And it led to eventually the patricians giving the plebeians more rights, especially when the plebeians needed, probably the patricians needed the plebeians to help fight their wars. Eventually, the plebeians got the right to send two of their own, two tribunes. These were two plebeians who were sent to the Senate, and these tribunes had veto power. Now, we're going to run into a lot of terms that later found their way into the American Constitution. Our president and most of our governors have veto power. It comes from this time. The tribunes, if they didn't like a law the patricians passed, they could simply refuse to go along with it, and the law would not become law. Veto power. Also, another term, the Romans had a Senate. We have one. And if you look at the Roman Capitol dome, they had built domes. Our Capitol buildings from almost every state in the Union is under a big dome. Right here in Atlanta, there's the big Golden Dome. Go to Washington, D.C., go to the capital of West Virginia, you'll see almost every state, Ohio, almost every state has a big dome for the capital. That idea comes from Roman times. All right. Now, back to Carthage. While Rome was building up its empire, Carthage was building up its. Right here between Rome and Carthage was an island called Sicily. Carthage claimed that Sicily should be theirs. Rome said, no, Sicily is closer to us than it is to you. We're going to take Sicily. So there were 3 wars fought between Rome and Carthage. These wars are known as the Punic Wars. All right, the first war, war number 1, was fought over Sicily. This war lasted several years. It ended with the Romans winning. All right, round 1 goes to Rome. Well, many years went by, and this time they fought again. Over this time was Rome began to look towards Spain and claim territory here, and again Carthage said, this territory is ours. And Rome would say, well, this is on our side of the Atlantic, we should have it. So they began to fight again, a second war. Now, the second war featured one of the greatest military leaders of all time, a man named Hannibal. Hannibal knew from the beginning that Carthage was, at this time, much smaller than Rome. And he knew from the beginning he was fighting what could easily be a losing fight. But he knew he would never engage the Romans in a decisive battle. Instead, he would pick at them at a weak spot and then disappear. He wound up getting into Italy, not by going directly into Italy from Carthage, but by sneaking around and going to Spain, then marching a whole herd of elephants from Spain through southern France and through the Alps mountains, and into the dead of winter, where the Romans least expected. When he got him and his whole herd of elephants into Italy, and for 20 years he went up and down Italy, attacking the Italians where they least expected, and somehow or another he could move his big army so fast, the Italians never were able to catch up to him. He would not attack the bigger cities. Again, he knew enough to leave them alone. But he created terror throughout Italy. Lasted 20 years. Now, I said he did not engage in a decisive battle, but there is one battle that he engaged in. The Battle of Cunae. I'm not going to write that down, but basically, let's say that this is the Italia, or the Romans, and this is Carthage. Hannibal told his center, now you center, fall back when they lunge at you, fall back, you wings hold tight. Well, look at the battle after a few hours. The wings were holding tight, the flanks, the center was pulling back. So on the other side, the center was giving it this. The wings here were holding, or the flanks were holding steady. Go back a few more hours. and the wings were beginning to close in. Go a few more hours, and Hannibal had completely encircled the Romans. The Romans, like the Greeks, only covered the front of their body. In order that they would only arm yourself in the front, the backs were exposed. This was to deter a man from turning around and running, because he knew if he turned around, his back was so they could deter. But it meant also that if the enemy got behind you, they'd whip you. The Roman army was slaughtered. The Carthaginians came in after the battle with bushel baskets and collected everything of value, the best of the Roman weapons, the gold and jewelry, and sent it back to Carthage. But even this battle was not a big decisive point. The Romans had more men they could send. Well, finally, after 20 years of being harassed by Hannibal, a Roman general named Scipio outmaneuvered Hannibal. He said, hey, he has been fighting on his terms for 20 years. I'm going to take my army and I'm going down here to Carthage, and we're going to engage him in Carthage. So when Scipio went to Carthage, Hannibal realized, oops, the city of Carthage, I have all the Carthage army here with me, and the city of Carthage is undefended. So Hannibal went down to Carthage, and this time Scipio forced Hannibal into a decisive fight. Hannibal's initial move was to charge his elephants at the Roman legions, but Scipio was ready. He said to his men, now I know you've been trained to never ever break ranks, to hold tight, to when the elephants charge at you, I want you to do the unthinkable, break ranks, form a pathway, and as the elephants gallop or walk toward your rear, kill the rider. You'll be exposed. So, when the elephants charged, the Romans broke the ranks, formed a path, the elephants trod down the pathway, the rider was killed, and the elephants went harmless to the Roman rear with no rider. The elephants had no idea what to do. Basically, Hannibal's elephant charge was a flop, a failure. Hannibal was defeated by Scipio, and Hannibal was exiled deep into the interior of Africa, down here toward what's called the Atlas Mountains. Hannibal eventually escaped and went here to Asia Minor and Greece to try to stir up more trouble for Rome. He was unable to mount another offensive. He died in defeat, but he gets more honor than most generals do who were victorious because of the way he kept Rome at bay for some 20 years. Well, 50 years went by. Then Punic War number 3 broke out. By this time, Rome was more powerful than ever, and Carthage was even weaker than it had been. The point I want to make, Rome was able to get the Italian people and the people of Sicily on their side and make alliances with them. The Carthage people were never able to join up with the Romans. The Carthaginians were the type of people you could not make peace with. So finally what Romans did, they went into the city, destroyed it, put salt in the ground and plowed up the ground with salt in it, and then wet the ground a little bit to make sure the salt absorbed in the ground to guarantee that the ground would not be productive for many, many generations. Now again, eventually the city of Carthage was partly rebuilt, but it was never productive and never rose to the size that it has. Today it's nothing but ruins. As for the people of Carthage, they were either all killed or sold as slaves, but they were scattered throughout where they could never unite and never reassemble. This was the way that Rome handled Carthage. All right. Now, at this point, I always interrupt my narrative somewhat. Carthage burned and enslaved. When I was studying for my master's final, I had to read 12 books, and one of them was about the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars went into some detail about the city of Carthage. It said that the city of Carthage had a religious system that involved a whole lot of voodoo, what we might call voodoo, witchcraft, mind control, trying to control the masses through magical means. This is not found in Roman religion, folk, at least not mainstream Roman religion. You might think this is a war of the past, and what difference does it make to us? A lot. If Carthage would have won the Punic Wars, I seriously suspect that we would not have airplanes today, we would not have electricity, we would not have radio, we would not have TV, we'd still be driving horses and buggies, because the Carthage system, the religious system, as far as I'm concerned, was far inferior to the Romans. And it's not that I'm pushing for Roman deity, it's just that I think that the Carthage religious system is better. I think religion is extremely important, and it's better for at least Western civilization that Carthage did not win. That's point number one I want to make. With its, again, its emphasis on witchcraft and mind control and being completely priest-ridden. No freedom of thought or freedom of expression, which the Roman religion did allow, at least to some degree. Now, the second point is, you sometimes might find yourself fighting against people who simply, no matter how much you lick them, they're going to keep coming back, and they never, never, ever quit. What do you wind up doing to these people? I'll let each of you decide for yourself. I've got to stop. I can tell you what the Romans did. Killed most of them, enslaved the rest, and scattered them, and made sure that they would never reassemble on their own old homeland again. It might have been the only logical option that the Romans had. They just simply could not keep on fighting them every generation. All right. Again, I'll leave that subject unless any of you have some comments you want to utter. We fought the Japanese and it looked like they wouldn't quit. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on them, they quit. We bombed the Germans and kept on and kept on. Eventually, they quit. We fought the American Indians, and the American Indians had to justify where the line of the land was theirs, and the white man was not keeping his treaties. Hear that from a white man. But the American Indians did not have any chance at all of winning. Eventually, they quit fighting. There are some people, though, who they're not going to quit. They're going to keep on coming after, keep on and keep on and keep on and keep on, and then keep on some more. How do we handle it? Now, the wars made family life a little bit different. The initial wars were fought in Italy, and a Roman soldier would go out and maybe go out for a week or two and then come home. The war was over. Or he might go a few hundred miles away to another farther part of Italy, stay gone a couple of months and come home. For him, the war was over. The Punic Wars now involved soldiers going as far away as Spain or even going to Carthage, and they involved soldiers being put in the army for 10, 20 years or until they became too old or got wounded too badly. It had a really bad effect on family life. A soldier would go off to war and come home and find his land. His wife had to sell his land because she couldn't pay the bills, couldn't pay the taxes. Or the soldier himself might come home badly wounded, unable to work anymore, and he would have to sell his land. Make a long story short, the rich gobbled up almost all the land and left the average Roman landless. Now, of course, you always have a case, and I can tell you when I was in the army, some of these men would get away from their homes and do things that they had been brought up to not do. In Roman times, it was no exception. The women too. A lot of men went off and found that when they got home, their wife was married to another man. This happened in a lot of our wars also, where a lot of times the man would pick up another wife and bring her home and say, "I'm divorcing you," his original wife. The wars brought a permanent change on family life that Rome never fully recovered from. Initially, in Roman times, couples married and stayed married for life. Divorce was very rare. Then came the wars, and divorce became much more common. And there became then an increase in the number of bachelors as a lot of men and women decided, hey, I'm not going to marry at all. Morality declined, and a lot of people believed that this was eventually to lead to the decline of the Roman Empire. Now, my very first term paper, high school paper, was entitled, Is American Society Following in the Footsteps of the Roman Empire? I'll probably have more to say about that as we go along, but I came to the conclusion it was that a lot of what we see in Roman times was to be repeated later with a increased number of bachelors, more and more adults not being married. Today in America, I understand 1/2 of the adult population is unmarried and might remain so. And it resulted in a big, huge population decline. Not brought on by war, not brought on by plague. I'll say this about what war does to population. When the war is over, there's a big baby boom. My dad was a baby boomer from World War I. His father fought in World War I, came home and had a bunch of kids. I was a baby boomer from World War II. The soldiers came home and had a bunch of kids. And they would oftentimes name their children after a loved one or a friend they knew who had died in the war. But wars bring in more people than it takes out. Mankind's worst enemy, though, appears to be prosperity, ease and luxury, and having too much of everything, becoming spoiled rotten, and getting yourself set up right for being conquered or adversity. This same thing was happening to Rome. Now, as time went on, a Roman general named Marius made a big mistake. He didn't think it was a mistake. He began with, he had to raise an army to put down slave rebellions for one thing, and also to help maintain the Roman Empire. Well, instead of raising an army only for Roman citizens, he began to raise an army from people who were not Romans, barbarians, people outside the empire. That was probably a little bad enough. I mean, it would be like our American army deciding, hey, we're going to hire Filipinos, we're going to hire Mexicans, we'll take in Japanese, we'll take in Ugandans, anybody we can get in, well, mercenaries, basically. That was bad enough, but he also made the troops swear loyalty to General Marius. Now, I'll say this. When I joined the Army in 1979, I did not swear an oath of loyalty to President Jimmy Carter, who was president at the time. I swore to the United States government to defend, one hand on the Bible, the other hand raised to heaven, to defend the United States. Marius made the troops swear loyalty to him, that we'll follow you wherever you go and we'll obey your orders, we'll follow you to the ends of the earth no matter where you may lead us. Huge mistake. Now, what this amounted to is that every powerful man in Rome was building up his own army. I mean, if you can imagine a world where Ted Turner could build up an army of maybe 1 million men, and Bill Gates would build up an army of about 2 million men, and each rich tycoon would build up their own army, guess what? Eventually these armies would start fighting each other. And that's exactly what happened. Marius began to build up his own army. Well, Marius passed off the scene. He was eventually defeated by a general named Sulla. But what this amounted to was that 3 men, Crassus, Pompey, and Julius. These 3 men are called the first triumvirate, or triangle. These 3 men were the 3 most powerful men in Rome, and they shared their power. Well, this did not last indefinitely, because Crassus was sent over here to fight the Seleucids. He was killed while fighting. Crassus got to this position because he was the richest man in Rome. And folk, I read the other day how he got his wealth, but I've forgotten how it was. But anyway, he built up his own wealth, became the richest man in Rome. When Crassus was killed, that left it up to Pompey and Julius. Well, they sent Julius up here to what is today France, but they called it Gaul. Julius conquered Gaul. And this, of course, brought what is today France into the empire. And what this amounted to was, even though Crassus was himself killed, the Romans by this time had basically all the area around the Mediterranean. What is today Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, Greece, Bosnia, Bulgaria, and Turkey. They had all this region here now. One person put it this way, though Rome had gained the whole world but lost its soul, be that what it may, Julius had conquered Gaul. Well, once Julius had conquered Gaul, he felt really strong. He had a really powerful army. Pompey was fearful of him. Then Pompey got the news that Julius was marching toward Rome. The Roman Senate was in a lot of fear and trembling also. Julius Caesar, as he would cross a river, when he knew the last man would cross, he'd tell his men, all right, I want you all to turn around and burn the bridge you just crossed. The bridges in those days were made of wood. And that's where we get the expression, burn the bridges. Burning our bridges means that we're not going to go back. We're either going to conquer Rome or we're going to die trying. Now later on, Cortez did the same thing when he went to Mexico. Cortez went to Mexico and he told his men, now burn these ships. We're either going to die here trying to conquer, or we're going to conquer the Aztecs, but we're not going to go back. So anyway, Julius Caesar ordered the bridges to be burned. He crossed the Rubicon River in the northern part of Italy, and it became an expression, I've crossed the Rubicon. In other words, I've reached a point of no return. I cannot go back. I mean, an airplane flying across the Atlantic Pacific, they can fly so far, then they reach a point where they have to finish their flight because they cannot return back. They don't have enough fuel. It's called a point of no return. Julius Caesar, when he crossed the Rubicon, said, I've reached a point of no return. I want to back up in the narrative a little bit. When Julius Caesar conquered Gaul, he sent a message back to Rome that consists of 3 Latin words, Vina Vita Vici. If any of you can pronounce it better than I can, you're welcome to do so. The 3 words mean in English, I came, I saw, I conquered. Any of you want to make a better pronunciation? Some of you pupils say that I mispronounce it. I never studied Latin. I did Spanish, but not Latin. But 3 words. All right, anyway, Julius Caesar returned. Went to Rome. The Roman Senate sent him a letter, put down your arms, and retired a private life. They were highly fearful of him. Julius Caesar replied with one word, no. He went on into Rome. He met Pompey, defeated Pompey, and Julius then took over, and we know him today as Julius Caesar. The month of July is named after him. He named one of the months, and it was to be a long month, a 31-day month. The next Caesar, Caesar Augustus, named a month after him, also the month of August. But because August was shorter than July, Caesar Augustus took a day off the unlucky month of February. February is looked on to be an unlucky month in those days. Took a day off from unlucky February, which made February the shortest month there is. And August is equal in length to July. Caesar Augustus. Anyway, but back to Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, with him, the republic came to an end. Now, he tried to make it look like he was not king. He knew the Romans really had a sour attitude toward having kings. Just like we would today if some dictator would take over, I can pretty well guarantee you he'd not call himself a dictator, but call himself something else, but he'd invent some term. Julius Caesar called himself dictator, which in those days meant one person ruled, but so it did not have the same trappings as a title of king. But for all practical purposes, the democracy was over. The republic was over, and Rome was now it was now a dictatorship. Julius Caesar then proceeded to marry Cleopatra, and when he married Cleopatra, who was the queen of Egypt, this helped to guarantee that Egypt would be part of the Roman Empire now also. Again, which gave Rome the master of all the Mediterranean. And everything seemed to be going Julius Caesar's way. Now, I'll have more to say about Julius next time. I'm going to come to his demise here. According to the story, and this story used to be in the old books by the same authors, but it's since been taken out. Julius Caesar was approaching the capital one day, and a blind soothsayer met him and said, on the Ides of March, you're going to die. Julius Caesar paid no attention to the blind soothsayer. Now, I've been asked, the only thing I've found significant about the Ides of March, and by the way, the 15th of March, the only thing of significance is Julius Caesar actually did die that day. And when Julius Caesar was marching the Capitol on the Ides of March, he passed by this blind soothsayer and said, "Ha ha, it's the Ides of March and I'm still alive." The blind soothsayer said, "The Ides of March are not over yet." Unknown to Julius Caesar, some 24 men had placed daggers under their cloaks, and from this we get the expression cloak and dagger. And they had planned this for some time, and they said, "Now you engage in conversation with him, and you get from, and then the rest of you," and each one of them was assigned, "you get in front of him, you get in front of him, and you get to his right side, you get on his left side, and you get behind it. When the man who was talking to him says a certain word, gives a certain signal, we all pull our daggers out." So Julius Caesar was in the Senate, and all of a sudden, all the daggers, 24 or so daggers, were pulled out from under cloaks. Julius Caesar tried to defend himself. Julius Caesar's friends were unarmed. Nobody came armed to the Senate. In those days, there were no metal detectors. So this Julius Caesar tried to defend himself. His last words when he saw Brutus among the crowd said, "Et tu, Brute," meaning "you too, Brutus." Then he suffered from about 20-some stab wounds that killed him. All right, we'll take up next time with what happened afterward. With that, if anybody has